To introduce you to this panel. I just want to say by way of introduction, my name is Luis Alberto Urrea. I'm a proud veteran of Mexican American Studies programs, and gee, it's too bad they didn't lead me to anything good in life. So, you know, before we get started, I just wanted to say something that, you know, this isn't really about books. It's about our children, and it's about the freedom of thought. And I just want to tell you that we are really, really blessed to have MAS students here with us right now, today. And I was wondering if y'all would stand up for a second. Can you stand up for a second? These are our children. That's what it's about. I want to introduce you to the editor of Ban This, one of my favorite people in the world, and somebody who's really doing the battle, Santino J. Rivera, poet, editor, activist, and as I said to these kids that we met earlier today, and this is a compliment, Santino thinks it's 1971, so he's an activist. And I've asked Santino to introduce his panel of people. I'm a little fanboyed out right now with these folks up here, but thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Santino.
Hello, welcome. Thank you all for coming. It is an honor to be here with you. As Louis said, I'm a publisher, independent publisher and author, and being here is a dream come true. This book was hatched out of what has happened in Tucson, and through, you know, this amazing journey, here we are presenting to you and bringing it to you in person. It's very humbling. It was very humbling to meet these students and see who this is directly affecting. I was able to reach out through the internet, through social media, and go coast to coast and bring together, you can see one of the slides has all of the authors that I was able to contact. Some of them were rock stars like Luis here and Gustavo Arellano down here on the end, and other ones are up and coming and, you know, part of the next generation of Chicano and Chicana authors. One of the things we were trying to tell these kids this morning is that they are not alone, and the whole world is watching. It's really kind of mind-blowing and a little surreal, in a Twilight Zone kind of way, that we're here in this day and age talking about censorship of literature and of art, and really of history. So let me just thank you again for coming. Let me introduce everybody. You guys know Luis Alberto Urrea. He's internationally best-selling author. This guy is one of my heroes. I was telling the Arizona Daily Star the other day that a lot of literature, American literature courses push Walt Whitman. I like to push Luis Alberto Urrea because both are American literary treasures and both need to be recognized. You know, and we are talking about, you know, people are afraid of the word Chicano and Chicana. It's one of those loaded terms nowadays because of the way politics rolls, but you know, we're talking about American authors. This is American literature. You know, this body of work, these studies, it's American studies. It needs to be recognized and embraced by everybody. I mean, we're just like everybody else. So that's part of the reason that we're here. So let me introduce the rest of the panel. To my left, we have Andrea J. Serrano. She is from Albuquerque, New Mexico. She is an author, poet, and a musician. She's got an amazing poem in the book. I hope you guys check it out. To her left, we have Liz Huerta, who is an educator, author, and poet, and she is from San Diego, California, and she has really just mind-blowing, amazing pieces in this book. One in particular is it's about the games that kids play as children. It's called Border Patroller. I really liked it. You have to check it out. And then on the end, we have another rock star with us who is gracious enough to lend his talents to this book and to this panel. This is Gustavo Arellano, and if you don't know, he is coast to coast in weekly papers, and I think some dailies too. No, just weeklies. This is Ask a Mexican. So if you've ever opened a paper and you've seen the little stereotypical character guy with the big tooth, the gold tooth and the sombrero, and he answers questions from anybody and everybody about Mexicans. This is him. He's also the editor of the OC Weekly in Orange County, and he's the author of Taco USA: How Mexican Food Conquered America, which he'll be talking about later today. So I mean, it's a real honor for all of us to be here with you and to present this to you. And I'm gonna hand it back to Luis.
Awesome, Pam. So, Santino and I spent a lot of time talking about this issue on Twitter, now all morning, and the thing that's really been haunting me lately is this, and I thought it'd be a useful first question, but I cannot comprehend why, when the issues began to transpire here, that the first national media coverage was in France, in England, in Russia, and the United States didn't pick up on it for quite a while. And I'm curious. It just, I'm not saying any kind of conspiracy or any other thing, but it's just really, I don't understand what that is about. And I was wondering, I know you'll have an opinion, but I was wondering what was it that kept the mainstream media from really pursuing this story for quite a while, do you think, in this country?
Well, I think this has been going on for a long time. We were talking about the Chicano movement, which goes back decades, and there was a Chicano journalist in LA, Ruben Salazar, that was killed by the police out there during the Chicano moratorium. And I've been reading a lot of his stuff, and I noticed back in the 70s that the word Chicano and Chicana was part of the national lexicon in those times. It was spoken about in Congress. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal about Chicanos in East LA and about the movement that was going on. And over time, we've really kind of gotten away from that word and that history. That word has become a very scary word because of people's fear and people's ignorance. And I think that a lot of the media and a lot of people have kind of clung to pushing that word, anything related to that word, kind of off to the side as kind of it's kind of a hush kind of word. So I think it's almost accepted in the media nowadays that if it has anything to do with Mexican American studies or Chicano studies or anything even it doesn't even have to relate to the studies. If you're not talking about immigration, the media or a Latino voting bloc, the media doesn't really talk about it. They'll use words like Latino or illegal. If you start using words like Mexican or Chicana, that scares people for some reason, and it shouldn't. I mean, we're talking about books. We're here at the Tucson Festival of Books, which has a big actually, tinge of irony to it when it's in the same state where books are banned. That's a real kind of bizarre kind of irony. So I just think that people are afraid, and people are usually afraid because of ignorance. If people would just look and read these books. I mean, read Luis's books. Read Occupied America by Rodolfo Acuña or any of these banned authors, and just form your own opinion and say, what, these are just words. This is just a book. These are just ideas. This is just literature. I'm hoping that through us being on C-SPAN and through you people being here who may be from the area or from out of town, I don't know, but you'll take something from this, whether you agree with it or not, and you'll say, we don't need to be afraid of literature. We don't need to be afraid of books, So hopefully that'll carry on.
Go ahead.
I think when we're talking about coverage in the media and why wasn't this a big deal right away and why didn't this get national coverage, I think specifically it's because it is about Chicanos. And I think that we are pushed to the margins, we are erased oftentimes, and I think really looking at the literature, it wasn't just books by Chicano authors that were banned, even though that was a majority of the books. but oftentimes we are left out of the national conversation, and especially in the Southwest, being from New Mexico, we don't make national media a lot of the time, and when you're really talking about something like banning books, what we're really talking about is a racist act. We're talking about an act of racism. We can cut it and slice it every which way you can about education and funding. We're talking about racism, and no one wants to talk about racism anymore. There's this idea that, Chicanos don't face any kind of racism, and well, we elected a black president, we're not a racist country anymore. And Santino was talking last night about this idea of, why don't you just get over it already? And we don't get over it because you keep putting our books into boxes. And you keep passing laws against us. This isn't just happening in Arizona. New Mexico's right on that line of constantly putting brown people in the crosshairs. And so really when we're talking about why are we being ignored by media, because we don't want to call this for what it is, and it's an act of racism.
I think, going back to Lisa's question, it's more of an indictment of the pathetic state of the American mainstream media today. Santino was right, during the 70s, Chicanos were all over, even the word and the coverage of Chicano. One of my all-time favorite magazine covers came from Sports Illustrated. I think it might have been 1970. The picture was Joe Cap, the great Minnesota Vikings quarterback, and the headline was very simple: "The toughest Chicano." That, just plain and simple. Sports Illustrated didn't try to water it down. They just said this is a man who's Chicano, which I'm sure for the rest of the country, Cap? That's not a Mexican name. That's not a Chicano name. And Sports Illustrated just treated it as an aside. And how sad that 40 years later, that you, activists especially, we have to beg the media to cover, and not even just stories of controversies, but just stories that treat Latinos and Chicanos as normal people outside of the tropes of illegal alien savage this, or poor unwed mother that, or that. It really is an indictment of the media, and especially nowadays with media consolidation, media layouts, I just see this getting worse and worse and worse. But the great salvation is social media, is people who are not trained journalists who become bloggers on their own and spread the message across the way. In fact, I first found out about what was going on with Mexican American studies by blogs, by Facebook, by Twitter. I didn't have to rely on the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times or any other media outlet. And again, that's an indictment of the media, but that also shows the path forward, I would say, the path forward to get past these know-nothings and really go to the heart of the matter and teach what needs to be taught.
I think it has to do with being an other in the eyes of the mainstream media. The others are ignored, and it basically says to me and to you and to people who are Chicanos, you don't exist, you don't matter, your history doesn't matter, over and over again. It is racism, it's crap.
That'd be the headline. It's crap. So when this issue comes up, I am repeatedly reminded by people, there's no banning. There was no banning. You were boxed. You're banned. You're boxed. And I think that's a really interesting thing because, as I told somebody who wrote a long thing on my Facebook page about this, explaining how Luis Orrea's books are available in every bookstore in Arizona. He's not banned. And I said, the problem is that what happened here, people can't think of another phrase for but banning. Boxing doesn't work. It's like newspeak. I call boxing, it seems to me, a way to say it was a soft banning. And I think the shorthand has hurt Tucson and has hurt Arizona because the shorthand is book banning in Arizona or book banning in Tucson. Check it out on Google. There are over 28 million hits under Tucson book banning. That's really scary to me because that to me does not reflect Tucson, Arizona. But that is it. That is the picture now in the country. So I want to ask you about that, the sly use of terminology to manipulate what the story might be. On all our sites, perhaps. I'm not going to say we're all angels, but there's this weird use of kind of newspeak and bureaucratese to repackage and repurpose the message, the agenda. Talk to me about being boxed rather than banned. Because your book could have been called Box This. But that worked.
I don't think that would have been
That wouldn't work.
as catchy of a title. And actually, the idea for the title came directly from Luis.
Oh my God.
When we were talking on Twitter, and we were really fired up and we were really angry about it, and we're talking about terminology, and he says, you ought to publish an anthology and you ought to call it Ban This, MFers, and I said, that's brilliant, I'm gonna run with that, minus the MF part.
Too much coffee that morning.
But I thought, it was brilliant, but I mean, talking about, spinning something. I mean, that we live in the age of spin and of rhetoric now. I mean, ever since the 80s when Reagan rolled back some of the laws that said that you had to present both sides of the story and you had to present evidence and stuff. That was the birth of things like Fox News and so nowadays you have spin on everything. So when this happened, people came out of the woodwork saying you're lying. That's a lie. They weren't banned. They're just boxed. They're just put in the closet. The kids still have access to these books. They're just over there. They just have to go and get them. Which is insanity because we were talking with some of the students today, and we were talking with Curtis Acosta, who was one of the teachers, and he has had to totally reformulate almost 20 years of teaching because he feels like his brain is encased in barbed wire inside of his head because he can't let certain thoughts get out. I think he said that, he has illegal thoughts, you start putting away books and, that's a simple act, like they want to say boxing, but I mean, what are you really saying by that action? What are you really saying by doing that? You're saying, this book is illegal, this book is dangerous, this book is bad. The words you're reading are going to warp your mind and you're going to do awful things like go to college and get educated and become a productive member of society. I mean, I can hear Colonel Kurtz saying the horror, the horror of an educated brown mind, That's really what you're talking about, but they'll spin it, and some of the media does it too, and they'll say, well, these guys are just griping and complaining. They're not really a big deal. These kids can go to the library. I mean, if you've ever dealt with kids that age, just trying to get them, some of them, not all of them, but just trying to get them interested in learning and reading, and taking to literature is a task within itself. And if you take that out of the classroom, I mean, it takes so much extra effort to have them to go and do it on their own. I mean, sure, yeah, they can walk to the library, but I mean, that seems silly when they can have it part of their own curriculum. So you really have to think about the spin that people put on it. I mean, they say box, but I mean, what you're really talking about is putting barbed wire around the students and the teachers' heads. I mean, because they're now afraid to even think, things that might get them in trouble. So.
When I first heard about the ban or the box or the whatever you want to call it, it hurt me in a way that anything else hadn't hurt me. When I first heard about 1070, SB 1070, it made me really mad. And when I heard about all the other laws that just started spinning off and all the other states that were copycat, were passing copycat laws, it made me angry. But the book ban hurt me, and mainly because when I was 15, 16, 17, I was lucky enough outside of school to have mentors who were Xerox copying pages out of Occupied America and Pedagogy of the Oppressed and having us read them. And then I started seeking out, Dream Cultura by Burciaga and started just reading it, on my own and just finding all this Chicano literature using words that made sense to me and using ideas that just opened up my mind. And so to hear that this was being taken away, it hurt me in a way that nothing else had hurt. And so I think when it gets explained away like, oh, well, we boxed them. It's an insult to my intelligence, and it's an insult to your intelligence, to the students who said, okay, you want to take away our books, you want to take away our classes, we'll do it on our own time, on Saturday mornings, after school, and I commend you for that, because at some point we get to the place of realization that we don't need systems, handouts. You know, to paraphrase Audre Lorde, we weren't meant to survive anyway. We weren't supposed to be a part of it anyway. And so the fact that you're doing it on your own, keep doing it that way. The fact that this book that we, you know, that Santino brought us together and published this book, that's, you know, going around a system that didn't want those words to exist. And so the fact that you're still here when you weren't meant to be anyway speaks volumes about who you are. And so they can box, they can ban, you're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere.
I think it's terrifying that you would take something, when you ban something and you say you're putting it in a box, because when does it end? What is the next thing you're going to put in the box? You know, when rights are taken away, it's done incrementally to the point where you don't notice. What's that metaphor that if you put a frog in water, in cold water, and then you turn the heat up slowly, and it doesn't realize it's being cooked until it's dead? And I think that could very well happen if things like this are allowed to go on. So boxing as opposed to ban, it's terrifying. It's terrifying the spin they put on language and the spin they put on taking something away that's sacred and absolutely necessary.
What's most disturbing about this is that the people who are advocating this, they're using excuses to justify what they're doing, which is identifying specific books as somehow being evil and subversive and so terrifying that we cannot have our Tucson children be exposed to reading them. So that alone, I mean, you want to talk about newspeak, that's what it is. They're justifying their own excuses. And what's even more telling is that some of these books, I know how they basically got to this. This is, okay, this is what's being taught in Mexican-American studies, so anything Mexican-American studies does is automatically evil, so let's just ban it all. That shows, though, that they did not read a single damn book there. I just found this out yesterday, actually. And I thought I knew all the books, but one of the books on the list is called Two Badges, The Life of Mona Ruiz. And that actually goes back to where I'm from, in Orange County, California. That book there is taught in evil, conservative Orange County. It's taught in these schools, and not in Mexican-American studies. It's taught in high schools because it's an inspiring story, true story of a woman named Mona Ruiz who grew up in poverty, grew up as a gang member, turned her life around, is now a police officer going after gang members and, you know, being inspirational. This is, you know, if you want to get on the conservative level, these are one of these classic pull up your bootstraps, Horatio Alger fables that would be lionized all across the United States if it happened to a non-Mexican woman that wasn't being taught by Mexican-American studies. But the fact that it is, it makes it evil. So if more than anything, I mean, they can speak all they want, but you know, to use a term in Spanish, the very idea that this is even happening, this shows that the people in charge of Tucson Unified is just a bola de pendejos. They told us we could say stuff on that. So the English translation is a ball of dummies.
Talk about spin.
I learned from the best.
Yeah, and don't forget, you know, Sean Arce used the evil hypnotic burrito to hypnotize students to do his bidding, apparently, too. That was part of it. Sean Arce and Curtis Acosta, these guys, you know. I'm really interested in some of these issues on a greater stage, and we're starting to hit on this. You know, I'm always nervous. I said this to y'all last year too. I'm really nervous to come here and lecture Tucson. You know, it makes you feel like a carpetbagger. Yeah, I come down here from Chicago to tell you how you damn people in Arizona should live. But you know, I was lucky enough to live here. My wife was a reporter at the Tucson Citizen, and you know, you were a good home for me while I worked on Devil's Highway, Hummingbird's Daughter. So I know, you know, it feels like home in a certain sense, and it concerns me. But it concerns me about the bigger home as well. And we were wondering if, in fact, what is happening or has happened with these books, and really it's not about the books, like I said earlier, it's, I think, about larger issues, about the fate of the kids and so forth. But is this the canary in the coal mine? Is this the harbinger of what may be afoot elsewhere?
Yeah, this is obviously something that's been going on forever. How long have parents and groups been fighting against classics, titans of American literature. Grapes of Wrath, Huckleberry Finn, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So this happens again, your books, and now of course Santino's anthology. This is going to happen forever and ever and ever, the thought wars. But I think what's so galvanizing, I would say, about what's happening in Tucson is that it's now taking on a full, I would say, a body of work in this sense, Mexican American Chicano studies, although not all the authors, of course, were Mexican American or Chicanos. But people are finally realizing, again, we're worse now than we are in the past. People are realizing that Latinos, especially Mexican Americans, they are now all across the United States. We know this from the 2012 elections, where the Republican Party, where we had a candidate who thought that by recycling an old Lalo Alcaraz joke of self-deportation, that he thought that he was going to get people to vote for him. Instead, Latinos whipped the butt of Mitt Romney, and a day later, now with the Republican Party, yes, applaud that. But now Republicans are, oh my gosh, like there's Latinos. Let's tailor. Who cares that we've been demonizing them for the past 25 years? Let's less demonize them now. But no, it's going to continue. So in this sense, this is galvanizing, though, for those of us in the trenches who see, okay, if you're going to start going after literature that you find subversive, I mean, you've already been going after our civil rights, you've been going after our language, you've been going after us for 20-some years, or if you really want to take it back to the old days, 150 years, you've been going after this for a while. Now they're going after books to populace that needs to be needs to learn the language and the love of literature. Really, you're that desperate to keep your last gasps alive? All right, let's fight. Let's do it.
I like what Luis said about that feeling of going into a space and trying to say, oh, well, we're here to save you, when the reality is, people of Tucson and across Arizona have been fighting for a very long time. And the reality is, I think in New Mexico we get this idea of, well, we wouldn't let this happen here, we're a majority state. It did happen in New Mexico in 1996 in a little tiny town called Mon, New Mexico. Patsy and Nadine Cordova were our sisters and their teachers, and they started a mecha, and they started teaching Chicano studies, and it was not a big deal. And then all of a sudden, the principal, who's also Chicano, because New Mexico's got this whole identity thing going on. That's 3 days of panels.
That's another panel.
But the principal started coming down on them, and so they stopped teaching Chicano studies. They started teaching the teaching tolerance curriculum from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they got fired for being subversive. And they won their lawsuit eventually, and now they teach in Albuquerque, and they're a blessing and a treasure. But we forget that this happened in New Mexico. We're on the verge of it happening. We have, the first female Latina governor, Susana Martinez, who is horrible for our state and horrible for Latino people. She's part of that rebranding of Republicans, and she's gunning. She's gunning for undocumented people. She's gunning for women. She's gunning for everybody. And so a lot of us in our other states, we're watching what's going on in Arizona, but a lot of us are watching the fight that's happening because we're gearing up to fight in our own states, and we have to support each other. These borders don't exist. These borders don't exist between us. We're a sovereign people, and we deserve and we have to demand our right to that sovereignty. And so definitely no one is coming in and saying, well, this is what you need to do, Tucson, because we all haven't figured it out. We all haven't figured out. We don't, but we do know that we have to fight.
Just expanding on the canary, and also on what Gustavo was talking about, is like, okay, if that's what you're going to do, then we are going to fight you. And like Luis said about me and being stuck in the 70s, I mean, I attribute my parents, who were part of the Chicano movement back then, and that's just how I was raised. And I was talking with the students earlier that, when I was in high school, it was the early 90s, and that was a very tense time, and a lot of the pop culture from back then was very angry. You know, if you listen to the music from that era, we listened to Public Enemy and Rage Against the Machine, you know, and a lot of the art and a lot of the poetry, just everything about that time was about fighting back. And I think that we have lost a little bit of that. We've become passive. I think, you know, the internet is great, social media is amazing. I wouldn't be here without it, but I think part of, you know, one of the bad things about social media is that big, important issues get passed over very, very quickly. And I think that now that this struggle, this fight, it was brought to our attention last night, this is a federal issue now. Now there's a federal court that is going to uphold this ban on ethnic studies. So I mean, this has gone beyond being a single school district and being, you know, a city and being a state. You know, everybody looks side-eyed at Arizona and say, what's going on in Arizona? You know, this is a federal issue now, and this should scare the hell out of everybody. Everybody should be very afraid of censorship. You know, we have the right to freedom of speech in this country, and when that is threatened, people need to pay attention. Coast to coast, you know, the media, teachers, lawyers, doctors, everybody should be standing up and saying, you know what, this is dangerous. If they're going to start banning those books, they're going to start looking at everybody else. And like Gustavo was saying, it's been going on for a long time, but people usually take up arms and fight back coast to coast. But for whatever reason, you know, when it comes to Chicano and Chicana studies, it just kind of gets glossed over. You know, and that angers and infuriates a lot of us. And I'm hoping that we can, you know, bring more people to the fight, because we're all in this together, you know. I mean, there's a lot of diversity just in this room, and we're talking about Chicano studies, but, you know, we're all Americans in this room, and Chicanos and Chicanas, you know, our history is American history. They cannot deny that.
Yeah, I remember a professor at CU Boulder, Evelyn Hudahart, one of the experts in Yaqui history, and she debated Dinesh D'Souza, and he told her, well, you know, we're all sick of political correctness, and she said, oh, no, Dinesh, this is about historical correctness. And I thought, oh, Evelyn, you know, that was a really interesting response. And I do agree with you about all of us being together. D.A. Morales said something really interesting this morning, that he felt that Tucson is a kind of a traumatized spot. We have this dangerous border region, the most dangerous in the country. You know, people are still reeling from the Gabby Gifford tragedy. There's a lot of trauma here, and I think some of the passivity that the panel sees nationwide is, you know, we're pretty traumatized nationally too. And I think it's getting harder and harder to process what things to get up in arms over. But I think the issue, you know, that hits us all at home is that this is about us. It's about you and me. They may come after these guys right now, but then what? What's later? That's the thing that always haunts me. And I have fun joshing TUSD, and I always thank them for upping my book sales. You know, thanks a lot. But, you know, it's a tough issue, and I just want to say, on perhaps a note of hope here, but don't you think that telling young people no makes that thing sexy? And especially around literature, I mean, you know, when you look at Whitman, for example, Whitman, in his day, was called the sodomite. And he was lacerated for who he was. It didn't hurt him any in the long run. And Santino said something great when we were with the students this morning, that, yeah, we're in a landmine. Go ahead and step on the mine. Let the worst happen, blow up, and you'll find out you're still together after it blew up. That's interesting to me. He, in fact, told these students, this is radical. He said, take the shrapnel and go ahead with it. Mm-hmm. So talk to me before we go to questions and answers. Talk to me about the hope. What is the hope? It's kind of easy to be Jeremiah, right? Or Elijah, and call out doom. There's fire raining down on all of our heads. Woe to us all, which is how we feel. But what is the hope? Is the hope in the power of being denied? Is the hope in the unity of these people? Look at this audience. Look at who's here. Is the hope in the very fact that these works are a little sexier now for being denied. I always went to the back of the bottom bookshelf in my mom's library where I knew that stuff was hidden. So, you know what I'm talking about. Portnoy's complaint, yeah. So, what is the hope, do you feel?
I think that the hope for these kids is in, like you said, being told no, you can't read this. Like you said, that makes it, it gives it a taboo kind of quality that's going to draw people, even more to it. I mean, you're talking about up and thank you for upping your book sales, but I mean, for a kid, I mean, if you tell a kid, no, they're gonna want to gravitate to whatever you're telling them no to, and that includes literature. So, I was talking about we were talking about discussing how people are kind of afraid. I think not just here, but coast to coast, to stick your neck out and make a stand and say this is wrong. I mean, especially if you're a bigger organization or you've got some clout, because you're afraid of what's going to happen. You're afraid of the consequences. And I like to tell people that I am a worst case scenario kind of guy. I always ask myself, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? What's the worst thing that you can do to me? And in these students' position, if they're speaking out, if they're resisting, if they're rebelling, if they're they're reading books, I mean, what's the worst that they can do to them? And like Louise said, I mean, if the shrapnel comes off of that landmine, I mean, you're going to find that you're still there and you're going to be stronger from the experience. I hope to inspire not only you but kids and the next generation of kids to take action and to not take no for an answer and to not just take the authority of a school board or of a politician or of a hateful person and to question that authority and to act on their own. I mean, this book I created and brought all these people together. I mean, I did it. I'm an independent publisher. I mean, I don't come from Penguin or Random House or I don't have that kind of a bankroll behind me. This was all back like the old school, I did it myself because it's easier these days to do that. But I mean, I was able to go from just an idea to being here with you, and these kids can do that too. These kids can form their own study groups. These kids can form their own poetry readings, and these kids can form their own chapbooks and go out on the street and appeal to their local, the power of the local libraries. People really need to come together in their communities and use their libraries. I mean, libraries are powerful places. They don't get a lot of positive press anymore because, I mean, you always hear about people closing libraries and cutting funding and the hours are cut, and that's awful. People need to support their public and community libraries because that's where the power is. That's where the books are. These kids can be just as powerful as any politician or school board, but they have to stand up. They have to step on that landmine and take some of that shrapnel, and we have to stand with them so they can do that, and we can do it together.
I completely agree. I think when I think about hope, sometimes it's hard to have hope, and when you're hearing about things like this coming up, like the book ban and the attack on Chicanos and Mexicanos, I think back to Proposition 187 when that was passed in California in 94, and I think about, right now there's this fight in New Mexico to revoke driver's licenses from undocumented people and it's all playing politics, and so it's hard to have hope sometimes, but then this book comes together, and this panel comes together, and these students have come together, and it feels a little bit better. It feels like, okay, I still have animo to do this, and I feel like I'm going to be doing this forever, and that's okay. And so I think the hope is that we continue to do this together, because we're going to be fighting like this for a really long time. I'm okay with that, if you are.
I have hope. When I look at history, one of the things that I noticed is that artists are always in the forefront, in the trenches of revolution and of change. we're always right there in the trenches, and what's coming next. We're right there suffering. And if you look at history, artists are the emotional historians of the world. And the books that are banned and the books that are being written, we're laying the groundwork for tremendous change and tremendous inclusion and just revolution that's coming. You know, not bad stuff, really good stuff. You know, saying every one of you matters, no matter what you look like, no matter where you're from, you matter, you exist, and you count. So I'm actually very excited to be a part of this, even though it is scary at times. You know, sometimes the scary stuff, you have to go through the scary stuff to get to the good part. So I have a lot of hope, and I'm kind of excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, as Santino said, definitely a shout out to all the librarians out there. You guys are like the best freaking people in the world. Mention the best people in the world, repositories of knowledge, and severely underpaid and underappreciated at the very least. I'm a cynic by nature because I'm a reporter. I know the depravities of mankind. I know everything horrible that they do. But I'm also a student of history, and I see what happens when, for lack of a better term, when idiots try to suppress an idea. The idiots always lose. So in this sense, the idiots were Tucson Unified, the school board. This was actually the best thing that could have happened to Chicano literature and Mexican American studies you could have ever imagined. Think of it this way. If they had just allowed Mexican American studies to continue as they have, okay, you know, get great students going through the system. Maybe the system might be passed on in other districts in Arizona. That's an Arizona phenomenon. Nothing really happens. However, here comes these idiots. They come in, they ban it. Immediately, all across the country, people start getting galvanized. Youth are like, what are these books that we're not supposed to read? Let's read it. Authors together. Let's have these panels. Let's start social media let's start doing things on social media. A friend of ours from Houston, Tony Diaz, he runs this show called Nuestra Palabra. He actually started a movement called the Libro Traficante movement. So you know narcotraficantes? He's trafficking in books. So he got on a caravan traveling around the Southwest creating these underground libraries of these banned books, going to these community community centers or libraries saying, here's a bunch of donated books. Don't tell the feds, but here's these books, pass them on. He got a shout out in the New York Times opinion pages. That's how powerful the idea is. So in Tucson, again, you guys are on the forefront. You guys are the ground soldiers. Know that you have our undying support for those all across the United States. You guys have to take the lumps and bruises, but think of it this way. So many people in our past, in our American past, have had to take lumps and bruises so all of us together could enjoy the fruits of what ended up happening. So you can never suppress an idea, and especially you can never suppress a great idea.
Yeah. This is why Gustavo gets the big bucks. My last comment on hope is directed to you beautiful young folks that we spent the morning with. We told these guys this morning, you're not alone. We're all on Twitter, we're all on Facebook. You write to us anytime, night or day, and we'll answer you. But I want to tell you, here's the big hope on my part. This is the United States of America. Y'all vote. You vote.